In the normal circumstances, a locum tenens is a figure that doesn't have a big job description list. Like when Patriarch Pimen passed away in 1990, Metropolitan Philaret of Kiev, he was a locum tenens until the council elected Metropolitan Alexei of Leningrad. Okay, so basically a locum tenens job is to deliver the church to the next council, which would elect a successor, right? And in this situation, everything was uncharted and everything was unprecedented. So a lot of things were intuitional, in the sense that the Russian Church remained without a patriarch for almost 20 years. Only in 1943, a patriarch was elected. Right? And this gives you right away a lot of food for your thought regarding the freedom of religion, of freedom of the Orthodox Church in the Soviet Russia. It's not that church didn't want to assemble, but church didn't have any legal rights to assemble a council. Right? Remember what we talked about, that
Father,
yes, brother.
wasn't it Stalin who pushed for it?
Yes, exactly right. But Stalin did it as an act, on his, again, as of his personal whim. And when Stalin died, Khrushchev said, but there is no legal rights for you. So basically, Stalin, out of his personally permitted church to assemble a council without changing any status, any legal status of the Russian church. Do you follow me, Brother Ivan?
Yes, thank you.
Sure. Right. And before Stalin changed his mind in 1943, right, in the course of the war, the objective was to cause as much destruction as possible to destroy the church, right? There was special department of AGPU, which was a secret police force, that was called liquidational, right? Liquidational department. The church has to be liquidated. It's only a matter what we can afford. And reality was that in 1947 there was census, all nation census, and that census proved that a good solid over half of people who were polled, they confess themselves as Orthodox Christians, despite all persecutions and how many refused to do this. So Russia was still remained there was still very strong, solid presence of Orthodox Christianity. It was impossible to eradicate it, to get rid of this just in the course of few years, in the course of 5-year plans. So therefore, they had to recognize this and deal with this. And Metropolitan Peter, he considered by many an upstart, because he only became bishop in 1920. He was close to Patriarch Tikhon. He was very rapidly elevated through all ranks, which always a good reason not to be liked by people who spent years and years through various ranks, right? And nobody knew what to expect from him, because he was a special officer, chinovnik of the Synod, who would go around Russia and examine seminaries and theological schools. So they didn't really know him as a bishop. But as we know, his name became providential, Kiefer, stone, rock, and he preserved unity of the Russian Church in his person. And what we now know from interrogation, that there were also advances toward him because the Bolsheviks, they wanted to play everyone against each other. When I'm saying Bolsheviks, it's very unhistorical of me. You can, it's sort of like saying Holy Fathers say, and you perfectly know that Holy Fathers live in different epochs in the road for different occasions. It's same here when I say Bolsheviks. To be more specific, I meant it's Evgeny Ivanovich Tuchkov, who became the first Soviet Unterprokurator, the first Soviet chief officer of the Senate. Again, nothing like that existed. It wasn't the name of his job, but de facto, he was now anti-church chief officer of the Senate, sort of the same role, but still Oberprokuror. He still had like state agenda, but the state didn't have an agenda to destroy the church, right? Now this person's agenda was to basically, he was like a devil. I'm sorry to say it this way, because he would give half of information to Patriarch Tikhon, so then he would give another twisted information to Metropolitan Agafangel, who was arrested. And also they trusted him because they didn't know how to do otherwise. So, and he was probably very, how to say, very easygoing, like bad cop, good cop, so kind of soft manners. And he would explain that, the Soviet government wants to help you, and we have this proposal. So what do you think about this, and so on. But then he never would give a full picture of. He never opened his like cards, So that was a situation. That's why hierarchs who didn't have any, how to say, skills to deal with this, they were not professional revolutionaries. They were not people they were not members of the intelligence community or whatever. So they really had sort of, that's why people like Metropolitan Peter, who canonized, glorified, we see that the only weapons they had was their faith. And that was a huge triumph of faith in Christianity, because they dealt with people who controlled them, and nevertheless they became Christ-like, because Christ was a loser for the world, right? He didn't summon legions of angels. He didn't show Star Wars show or whatever. So he died on the cross and so on. And they followed our teacher in this. Okay. So, and that became powerful, and you see the Russian Church resurrected. The Russian Church became stronger once again. But that's another story out of this, right? And Metropolitan Peter, he continued to play the same sort of tune as Patriarch Tikhon, and both of them meant this. They wanted to say that we totally recognize the Soviet government as our government. We don't have any mental reservations regarding this, but at the same time, we cannot really say that we have no differences. We cannot really give all what the government wants, and so on. And he came up with his epistle, Metropolitan Peter, when he became a metropolitan, Locum Tenens, and his epistle was not good enough. So at the end of the 1925, he was arrested, and he remained in various forms of captivity until his martyric death in 1937. Right? And his major achievement was that he didn't give up his rights of locum tenens, believing that by doing this, he would push the Russian church into havoc, right? Because he remained a unifying figure for all bishops of the Russian church. And nowadays, when there are confessors and martyrs canonized by the Russian church, a sort of a litmus test is whether this or that person commemorated Metropolitan Peter if they didn't commemorate his successor, Metropolitan Sergius, it is not considered an issue, that an obstacle to canonize this person. But if this person didn't commemorate during church services Metropolitan Peter, this is an issue that so it's not going to pass, right? This candidacy to be revealed as a saint. So Metropolitan Peter, knowing that he could be arrested, came up with his own list of successors. Of course, it's now have lesser status than patriarchal list, because Patriarch Tikhon did it by the assignment of the All Russian Council. Then bishops voted on this and so on. And now nobody voted, and it was done just purely in the sense to secure succession in the Russian Church. So in that list, there was Metropolitan Sergius. So it is important to understand that Metropolitan Sergius, he was substitute to the Locum Tenens of the Patriarchal throne. And this job is totally undefined. But it's very, how to say, very puristic to focus on this, right? Because everybody was acting in totally extraordinary situations. Only people who walk the talk there have right to speak about this. And there were people who disagree with Metropolitan Sergius back on the same grounds, and they give me sort of moral right to speak about this. Because I was saying last time when we had that one-on-one with brother Seraphim, that he beautifully survived with me. And I was saying that Russian Church abroad bishops who were quite vocal before the World War II against Metropolitan Sergius activity, they changed their mind once they found themselves on the territories controlled by the Soviet Union after the war. So all our bishops, including St. John of Shanghai, commemorated Moscow Patriarch Alexis. And St. John did it for a short time, but as the others did it for much longer period. So that gives us ideas that how carefully we should approach those things. It doesn't mean that we cannot say, I cannot speak about this because it was, I don't know what I would do. Yeah, that goes without saying, but as historians, because we take this class on history, so it makes everyone here to be a historian. So as a historian, we still can speak about, we still can respectfully assess the situation and basically supply our conclusions. So Metropolitan Sergii became substitute to the Locum Tenens at the end of the 1926. And from the very beginning, he started to show that he is going to defend his authority, and he's not going also to, he's not going to get things out of control. What do I mean by this? That Metropolitan Agafangel, who was on the patriarchal list along with Metropolitan Peter, he was the oldest senior hierarch according to the day of his consecration. He was suddenly released by the Bolsheviks. Another strange sign. Why did they release him? Probably just to cause more havoc. And he claims that he's going to take over position of Locum Tenens because he was on the original list from the Patriarch. And Metropolitan Sergii disagreed with this. Kind of Metropolitan Sergii's logic was that Metropolitan Agafangel was just released and he doesn't know the situation. It's not going to be good for the Russian Church. Okay, and basically he was backed up by bishops of this position. Didn't really, Metropolitan Agafangel sort of sensing on this, feeling all this, he then said, I'm not going to push it further. I'm just stepping back. I'm not going to pursue the matter with Metropolitan Sergii. So 1926 was the sole year of the first period of Metropolitan Sergii, when he continued, in a sense, of Patriarch Tikhon to remain collegial. And one of the very strong features of Patriarch Tikhon that he was a persona grata, he was accepted by people, very different people. Like when he was released in 1923, he wrote an appeal to the Bolshevik government, explaining that he is not an enemy and so on. And no less than Metropolitan Anthony Khrapovitsky wrote an article, "Не надо смущаться, let us not be confused," that praising that Patriarch Tikhon was released and saying, don't pay attention whatever lip service he paid to the Bolsheviks. So, and then when Metropolitan Sergii started to come up with very similar texts, right, with his famous declaration, which I'm going to share with you right now. So I'm going to share it with you right now that you can read along while I am talking, right? So if you read this text on Metropolitan Sergei Declaration, and if you compare it with the last testament of Patriarch Tikhon, they're quite similar, right? They're quite similar. But the difference was that at this time, Metropolitan Sergei, he was already joined for a short period renovationists, right? He joined renovationists, and then also he did not have this conciliar approach. During his first period, he consulted some bishops, the same way as Patriarch Tikhon would do. What do they think about this document? But a problem with this approach is when you try to reach consensus, you probably would end up with mediocre document. If you want to express some point that is challenging, right? Then it's hard to have consensus when you have a room of people with different. It's hard to have a document that you would like if you have a room of people who would contribute their suggestions to this document. So, and that's probably why Metropolitan Sergei gave up on this, and as a result, he came up with his own document, which was declaration. And I should say, this declaration became a big deal and remains a big deal in the diaspora. Bishops in Russia, they didn't pay that much attention to this declaration, but important things for them and important things for another very beautiful hierarch whose photo you see every day on the stairway, Metropolitan Kirill of Kazan, was that Metropolitan Sergei didn't have authority for this activity, because in 1926 he was arrested. In the spring of 1927 he was suddenly released. And he was allowed to register his head office in Moscow, which also was unusual. And so people would ask, why, how comes that he was released? Why did Bolsheviks release him? They probably made a deal. And indeed, there was some kind of agreement, and we only have the first minutes of his conversations, his interrogations, but the whole picture, what was discussed, is still not available for scholars. So documents, he was arrested in December of 1926, and I saw minutes from December of 1926, and as far as I know, I saw like minutes of few conversations that he had, right? But then the rest from December of 1926 until whatever he was released in March or something, we don't have access to this. No one has access to this as far as I know. So we don't have the full picture. And I am far away from thinking that Metropolitan Sergius, he was, how to say, that he was tortured. Nothing like that. I think happened maybe at most on psychological level. Even that I doubt. But my reading of him, I'm not sure, I don't remember if it was in that article, that he wanted to outsmart the Soviets, in a sense. He wanted to outsmart them, and he wanted to do the best to do the best for the Russian church, that he would finally get this prize, get this registration for the Russian church. Russian church would be legal as organization. And a tragedy that, you know, kind of, you don't play in cards with criminals, sort of kind of thing, you know, that the Bolsheviks, they also played him out, you know, and he never got all that he expected. And those people who disagree with his new course, right, those bishops, they were told that please don't cause any divisions, wait until the council. When I was a student here in Jordanville, I decided to write my graduate thesis on write a biography of Archbishop Leonti of Chile, who became a monastic in 1922 in Kiev, and he was a higher deacon of the Kievskaya Slavra Podvorya in Leningrad in 1927. So he was in the middle of all those events, and he was not sympathetic to Metropolitan Sergii, but he understood that if he would join opposition, those who ceased communion with Metropolitan Sergii, he somehow would help the Bolsheviks to cause more destructions in the church, because Bolsheviks also try to play things against Metropolitan Sergius, knowing that people would disagree with him, right? Kind of, they push him forward. At the same time, they tried by doing this to produce as much havoc as they could. So this Higher Deacon Leonti, later Archbishop Leonti of Chile and Peru, he decided not to join any opposition and remain with Metropolitan Sergius. And when I learned this, I was quite surprised, because I was thinking he was a bishop of the Catacomb Church in Russia, and I expected that he would be in sharp opposition to Metropolitan Sergius and so on. No, the reality was more complex. So the second period, Metropolitan Sergius started to suspend those who disagree with him, and as a result, unprecedentedly, we got about 5 metropolitans who were suspended by Metropolitan Sergius, no mentioning numbers of bishops, no mentioning suspension of the hierarchy of the Russian Church abroad, including Metropolitan Anastasii and Metropolitan Anthony Khrapovitsky and a number of other bishops in 1934. So, and that was something that demonstrate problems with the two major issues of the Russian church history in the 20th century, two major questions that don't have answers. Which path to choose, decentralization versus centralization? Metropolitan Sergius was very much in favor of defending centralization. So, and he kind of did those sacrifices for the sake of preserving office, for the sake of preserving linear succession, right? So kind of looking from distance, one may say it would have been much better to just leave everybody live, let everybody live, and let everybody just, you know, following their situation as it was prescribed by Patriarch Tikhon in 1920 in his decree 362. But Metropolitan Sergii, he was a very good canonist, and he believed it just would against church order, right? So I'm here and I just cannot, it's anarchy. I cannot really let it do it this way. I'm not sure if Bolsheviks also wouldn't be happy about this, if he would say, listen, you know, I'm not in position to do anything. When he was arrested himself, there was Archbishop Seraphim of Uglich who said the same thing. So, but he was arrested and so on. So therefore, Bolsheviks wouldn't be happy with this explanation that I don't have control and every bishop is now independent and so on. But perhaps it could be a response. Interestingly, our bishops in diaspora who were also unprecedented, whose status as a global church of Russian refugees was unprecedented canonically. So nevertheless, they also acted similarly to Metropolitan Sergius, suspending those who were disagree with the Council of Bishops in Serbia, right? So, and that's something I see like a mirror situation, that our bishops also didn't let everybody live their lives as they, I mean, continue with how they understood it in diaspora. They still were very much in favor of preserving this centralized power, centralized authority. But also, it's very important to remember the following thing. It's conventional wisdom that the Russian Church abroad bishops cease communion with the Russian Church, with Moscow Patriarchate, because of the declaration. It's not true. If we read a document of the Council 1927, it's beautifully done. Probably, I mean, Archbishop Anastasi was involved there, and it said that in order to alleviate, in order to exclude the Russian Church authority from responsibility for us, we found that we cannot remain in subordination. They basically wanted to close this case when Patriarch Tikhon was held accountable for the acts of the Russian political refugees, right? So that was the reason. And it said until normal communication is restored. And that was initially a very big point, that we are only autonomous until the situation is normalized. And this is something that used to be expressed in the first paragraph of the Constitution of the Russian Church Abroad, of the Statute of the Russian Church Abroad. The Russian Church Abroad is independent until the dissolution of the godless power in Russia. So, and that was a very strong imperative to have these negotiations with the Russian Church and join Moscow Patriarchate, rejoin Moscow Patriarchate, whatever. So those 2 years, they were very important, as you see, from 1925 until 1927. Metropolitan Sergius, he assembled a synod around him. Those who disagree, like Metropolitan Kirill, they pointed out that what Metropolitan Sergei was doing, that he's replacing in his person the entire council, because a synod as a body receives authority from the council, not from a single bishop. But again, those circumstances were extraordinary. At the end of the day, those who opposed Metropolitan Sergei, there were a number of them canonized in the Russian Church, the entire Russian Church, not in the only church abroad. Most of them, almost all of them, didn't survive Stalinist purges in the late 1930s. So after the World War II, there are only a couple, maybe 2 or 3 bishops remained in the entire Soviet Union who were not in the communion with the Moscow Patriarchate. Okay. So, and that gives me to think that there is one Russia and there is one Russian church. Okay. We don't have a spare parts for this, right? It's okay, but that was a big threshold, and Metropolitan Sergius, he wanted to get to the bottom of all issues. Like Patriarch Tikhon, he disbanded Russian Church authority in the diaspora, but he never really followed through. He made some statements that they reassembled under different flag, different name, and so on, reestablished themselves, but he never really issued any other decree, right? That's again give me idea to believe that he didn't really want to go. He only wanted to go as far as he had to. But Metropolitan Sergius somehow he wanted to follow through, and in 1926, during his first period, he still contacted Russian emigres, wrote a nice letter to them, sort of addressing them, "Дорогие мои святители." But unfortunately, in the diaspora, it wasn't really possible to maintain good secrets. Somehow, someone brought this newsletter to the newspaper. Therefore, without thinking that Metropolitan Sergius would pay price just by the fact of communicating with Russian political refugees, right? So this letter was published. This probably was brought against Metropolitan Sergius during his arrest and so on. And then also I forgot to mention that during his first period, he organized a secret council where bishops were polled by traveling priests or bishop, I think, to whom they would like to see a patriarch. And majority of them wanted to see Metropolitan Kirill of Kazan next patriarch, right? Metropolitan Sergei was not that trusted because of his renovationist involvement and so on. He also had a serious deaf problems. He didn't hear well. I mean, Metropolitan Sergius, especially towards the end of his life, right? Okay, so please get to me regarding your themes, regarding your research, questions, titles. All right. Okay.
Okay, sounds
Okay.
good, Father.
Okay, so we will pray.